Good evening, everybody. I'm just making another one of these videos because I had quite a bit of interest on one of my previous videos about echoism and narcissism. I had some people that I'm friends with that have watched it that reached out to me because they identified with some pieces of it and wanted to talk about it more or learn about it more. And I just wanted to say that I'm no expert. I'm not a psychologist or a psychiatrist or a trained mental health professional. So everything that I have read or listened to or whatever, I have picked from reliable professional sources, but myself, as far as interpreting them and applying them to somebody else, I'm not really qualified to do that, but I can offer my thoughts and my perspective on things, and I mean that's coming from my experiences, but I did want to kind of follow up on that video because there are a couple other things that I had been looking into after that, after I started exploring echoism and narcissism. And if you didn't watch that video, you can go back and watch it. But basically, echoism is this concept that people that have high empathy tend to have, and it's basically derived from your parental experiences as a child and the parent involvement, and not allowing you to be a separate individual. And it manifests itself in one of two ways, either echoism, and that would be suppressing your needs, wants, desires, and on the other hand, narcissistic tendencies to always be aggressively obtaining your needs, wants, and desires at the expense of other people. So it does stem from childhood wounds, at least the theory by Craig Malkin as proposed, from what I have read. And he's got a lot of YouTube content that's really interesting, so I watched some of it. So that basically is like childhood wounds can cause these two polarizations of behavior traits, so that as a child, that's how you got your needs met. I mean, in some cases, children were blatantly neglected or abused or whatever, and so they kind of develop coping mechanisms around that. And sometimes it's trying to suppress everything, and sometimes it's trying to push everything. But subsequently, after that video, and after I started researching more into echoism narcissism, kind of led me to this other YouTube video series by Brianna McWilliam, and she basically studies attachment disorders. And what Craig Malkin was talking about when he was referring to childhood wounds is this concept of attachment disorders. And so there are, as far as I understand it, 4 attachment styles, and one of them is stable attachment styles, which basically means that you can move back and forth between periods of closeness and periods of distance without too much to your partner or your primary relationship, without too much stress or anxiety, and this is not something that you would necessarily have challenges with. And then there's anxious attachment, which basically stems from typically inconsistent affection or attention by your primary caregiver or caregivers as a young person, and such that you aren't really sure that you are going to get your needs met. So you tend to be very clingy and needy and anxious about whether you're going to get what you feel like you need in a relationship. And then there is on the other side of it, avoidant attachment, which is basically suppressing, reducing your needs, wants, and desires, just like or like distancing yourself from tumultuous emotions, basically like disconnecting yourself from emotions to kind of ensure your safety. So, or that ensure that you are gonna be okay. So, and then the fourth one is disorganized attachment, and that is kind of moving back and forth between the avoidant. Avoidant people tend to, in conflict, retreat and tend to, do things like silent treatment, just kind of like shutting down kind of things, removing themselves from the argument or even like the vicinity. And anxious attachment in conflict will try to move towards the person that they're interacting with to try to keep securing a connection. But anyways, after and so the disorganized attachment, I did want to comment on that, is kind of moving back and forth between those two states, like moving towards somebody in a disagreement, and then like if you feel like you overreach a threshold, then pulling back, and then like isolating yourself, and then maybe like coming back out really strongly. So there's like periods of like really closeness, and then like retreat, and closeness and retreat. And that's usually because the attachment style that you experienced as a child was unpredictable, and like your parental caregiver would be really available and close with you, and then like for some unknown reason that you didn't understand as a child would be like withdrawn and unavailable, and either physically, emotionally, whatever. So after I started kind of looking into this, I understood that like the echoism people tend to be either more of the anxious attachment kind of people, or the disorganized attachment, leaning towards like the anxious side of things. So that would be somebody who would really want to connect very deeply, really want to reach out to somebody else, but in a sort of like a really sometimes over the top way, like a in a way that kind of doesn't allow for the other person to have any time or space or whatever for their own interests, like that can be like also leading towards codependency. And the avoidant partners tend to be like, narcissism tends to kind of fall within that avoidant category, because the people with avoidant tendencies tend to really just if feelings come up or whatever, they just kind of push it down, or like don't really move towards emotions. They if there's a dinner and you have a disagreement about politics or whatever, the first tactic of a avoidant person is going to be to try to, if it gets heated enough, to try to leave, to try to disconnect from what's going on. So I have kind of understood now that there's this concept called the anxious avoidant trap. So, and I really do feel like my personality type kind of falls into this category. I do believe that, for my own purposes, when I look at my attachment style, that I have sort of a disorganized attachment, but like I tend to be more on the anxious side than the avoidant side. But I kind of see both of those tendencies in myself. But so what happens in the anxious avoidant trap is that the anxious person with the anxious attachment style in conflict really gets like panicky, like alarm bells, like really fearful of a attachment, like a person that they're attached to severing their bond. And so what they do to compensate is to like really try to move towards the person that they're with, and for some reason, well, I could assume that the reason that anxious attachment people kind of get into a relationship with avoidant people is because it's familiar to their family upbringing, because a lot of times these people did have that kind of style in their childhood, and their primary caregiver was most likely an avoidant or tending on the avoidant side of things when in conflict. So they will try to really work hard to secure their connection to this other person. But what the avoidant partner perceives, and I have checked this because I was with somebody that fell into that. I was in that anxious avoidant trap pattern, or whatever you want to call it. The avoidant partner feels like you're clawing at them. You're like trying to control them. You're trying to manipulate them. You're trying to get them to behave in a way that isn't what they want. They have decided that they really don't want to engage with you because in their radar you're having emotions that are displaying themselves, and they really don't tend to do well with that. So they will retreat, either like physically retreat, or just mentally kind of shut down. And which ends up causing the other person to kind of try coming at them more. And it just ends up being this really like difficult dynamic. But it's kind of interesting that like on the flip side of things, the avoidant partner actually does have also attachment issues and have attached to this anxious person as their person of interest, as their partner, because typically anxious people are like really very generous with their time, with their affection, with their with their attention towards the other person. And it's something that the avoidant partner really does get benefit from. So they end up bonding with this person that they're relying upon for, affection, attention, like ego propping sometimes, like this kind of dynamic. So as much as the anxious person is attached to the avoidant person, and it seems like the avoidant person may not be attached to the anxious person, that they really are. And these relationships, these anxious avoidant relationships, actually can go on for quite a long time. And so, I think in general, at least in my experience, I don't know, as an INFJ, I tend to fall into the category of a person that sort of has echoism and falls on the anxious attachment side, but I do also have some avoidant tendencies where I will oscillate between anxious type of connection and then like avoidant type for like I guess for my own protection of my own vulnerability or something. So anyways, I'm still kind of working through all of this, but there was some interest in that echoism and narcissism video, and that's just kind of the things that I've started to explore as a result of being interested in that. The only other thing that I would say is that I think once you do become aware of your attachment style, it does make a huge difference in the way that at least it made a huge difference in me in the way that I view my past relationships and hoping my current and future relationships. But yeah, I think it's something that I'll always kind of keep in my mind, because one of the things that seems to be the case is that we do kind of recreate our past in our intimate relationships. Like we do recreate our first experiences with a relationship, which is with our parents and caregivers, and our romantic or friendship partner relationships. So if you do tend to be on one of those sides, anxious or avoidant or even disorganized, it's something that you want to be aware of as you go into a relationship, because once you start getting connected to a particular person, like that's when like all of this stuff that was kind of down, if it was not to the surface, it starts to kind of come out, because all of that stuff is tied in with like feelings of attachment are just all tied in together with your first types of attachment or lack of attachment. So it does seem like there is some evidence to support that, this is why people kind of have the same patterns in relationships, that they kind of are always repeating their childhood traumas. And that's kind of really, really, I guess, enlightening and like frightening in a way. I think it's just something to be aware of. And I think that the more that you can work towards working on, your own self, and giving yourself what you need for yourself, instead of kind of looking for a partner to get that from, is probably where somebody should go if they know that they have one of these types of attachment styles that it seems to be manifesting itself in their intimate relationships or their friendships or things like that. So, I mean, it's something that I'm still totally working on, and even just recognizing when I'm having a feeling that it is related to that has been huge. And now that I have labeled it, it's kind of like, okay, this is that again, and like these are the things that I could do, and to kind of mitigate some of that, like breath work and exercise and affirmations and things like that. So to just try to give myself the things that I know that I would need in relationship. So that's, I guess I wanted to kind of add on to that as I start to explore these things. And I hope it's at least thoughts or ideas to kind of percolate in your head. I really do. That woman that I've been looking at, watching YouTube videos, Brianna McWilliams, she's like amazing. I have watched a lot of her video content, and it makes a lot of sense, and it really did help me understand kind of the other side of the relationship that I was in and what that person was dealing with. Not to dismiss that, like, things that happened definitely were a result of, a mismatched attachment style, and like, definitely there were things that could have been different, but it just kind of helps me put into perspective and sort of like relieve myself a little bit of the things that I had considered my shortcomings or whatever, because I think we all have doubts, or at least you should have doubts when you break up with somebody, unless they're like a total like abusive person and just generally a horrible person. If there was at time, in your relationship, good times, and when that dissolves, this is painful, but there's like kind of a processing time afterwards, and I think it's a good thing to kind of see both sides of what happened, just to kind of get a little bit of clarity around it. So anyways, that's just kind of what I've been working on, and I'm sure that I'll have more to bring to the table at some point, as I kind of go through all of the massive amounts of psychology content on YouTube. It's like just amazing how much you can wade through out there. So I guess I just wanted to bring this up, and maybe some of you out there will be interested in exploring this kinds of stuff on your own. So thank you for listening, and thank you for watching, and I hope it was useful, and have a good night.